Today we're going to be talking a bit about what it was like producing music on this Core 2 Duo 2009 Polycarbonate MacBook. I've had this in my possession for quite a while now. This was actually destined for the trash. My coworker was basically told to throw this away, but he knew that I was into MacBooks, so he was kind enough to offer it to me, and of course I took advantage of it. You can see here I have a Logic Pro session up. This is one of the 3 tracks that I created that I'm going to be showing off and talking a bit about today. But before we get into the tracks, let's talk a little bit about this particular unit, go through the specs, go through what it's capable of, how it compared to other units at the time, and basically what it would be like using one of these nowadays, because honestly, it's not as bad as you might think. While I'm talking a bit about this MacBook, I'm going to be showing off some B-roll that I shot of it, as well as playing the tracks that I produced as background music. If at any point you're not interested in what I'm talking about, feel free and skip around the video. There's going to be a lot to this. But if you grew up with MacBooks newer than this could be a pretty interesting look back into history in terms of what people were actually trying to work with back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. On this MacBook, I'm running macOS High Sierra 10.13.6, which to my understanding is the most up-to-date version of macOS that this hardware officially supports. Though you can use something like DOS-Dude Mojave Patcher, or if you really want to get wild, you can try something like OpenCore Bootloader to install newer versions of macOS, although I cannot guarantee what the performance is going to be like, because don't forget, this thing has a Core 2 Duo processor running at 2.26 GHz, and it has a whopping 2 cores and 2 threads. So the fact that you're even able to produce music on this in the first place is pretty mind-blowing. Here's what every Mac says about this particular MacBook. This obviously is the late 2009 Polycarbonate Unibody MacBook. Modeled after the previously introduced Unibody MacBook and MacBook Pro models. This is of course just the MacBook, not the MacBook Pro. Like the aluminum Unibody models, this system also has a 4-finger multi-touch glass trackpad, which I'll say, even by today's standards, is really a great trackpad. There are plenty of modern Windows laptops that have worse trackpads than this, so it goes to show just how cutting edge Apple was at the time. This unit also has an integrated battery design that is not intended to be replaced by the end user, although to be honest, I think the battery's just screwed in. It's pretty easy to replace. This model is configured with a 45nm Penryn 2.26 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo processor, the P7550, with 2 independent processor cores on a single silicon chip, a 3MB shared on-chip Level 2 cache, and a 1066 MHz front-side bus, 2GB of 1066 MHz DDR3 SD RAM, installed in pairs, 2 1GB models. This particular unit has 8GB of 1067 DDR3 RAM, and let me tell you, if you're going to be using one of these nowadays, definitely upgrade the RAM. This originally came with a 250GB serial ATA 5400 RPM hard drive, although I upgraded mine to a 400MB Kingston SSD, which makes life a lot easier. Booting this thing up is super quick. I also went ahead and installed Windows 7 on a separate partition on this, and it works surprisingly well. That's going to be a separate video where we get into some Windows 7 gaming. I'm really excited to try that out. If you're interested in something like that, please consider subscribing to the channel. It'll help me out a lot and motivate me to make more videos like this. This MacBook also comes with an 8XDL SuperDrive, which I haven't tested on my model. I really hope it works, but they always broke on my 2012 MacBook. The MacBook also features an NVIDIA GeForce 9400M graphics processor with 256MB of SD RAM shared with main memory, and a 13.3-inch widescreen TFT Active Matrix LED backlit glossy display at a resolution of 1280 by 800. Now by today's standards, and definitely by today's MacBook standards, this display is not great, but it's honestly held up surprisingly well. I purchased a cheap Lenovo IdeaPad probably like 3 or 4 years ago that had a significantly worse panel than this, especially when it comes to contrast. This is a surprisingly good looking and rich display. While I was producing music on this MacBook, I was using a Lexicon Alpha interface, which was just plug and play. Didn't need any additional drivers, and that in my opinion is one of the biggest advantages of MacBooks, is their built-in core audio is fantastic compared to a lot of the Windows options, especially going back to something like 2009 and using old interfaces. Now, if you're curious about the setup I have here to record both the screen and the audio, I'll go over it really quickly. I have mini DisplayPort out of the MacBook, you can see here, going into this U9 HDMI splitter. That is being split into 2 HDMI feeds. One is going to this Elgato HD60S Plus capture card, going into OBS on this computer over here, and then the other feed out of that splitter is going into the display here, so I can look at it. For audio, I'm using headphone out of the MacBook into line in on this Asus A320MK motherboard, and then that's being captured in OBS as well, which was the best I could do, and honestly, it's going to work perfectly well for showing off these tracks. That's a pretty good overview of the track. Let's dive into some of the instruments I used. Most of the plugins I'm using in all of these projects are free, even the instrument libraries. Starting off here, we have Plug Sforzando Electric V, which is a very well-sampled library of a Fender Rhodes Mark V. The light version has a smaller key range as well as fewer velocity sampled layers, but it still sounds phenomenal. It's definitely one of the best free Rhodes keyboards you can get for any type of music production. We have quite a few plugins as well. High shelf boost, mid cut, and a bit of a Pultec trick with a low shelf boost and a low shelf attenuation. I forget which company makes this, Sonimus, I believe, Sonimus Sonic EQ. And some harmonic drive, as well as WOW, which I guess is kind of like a stereo imaging tape effect. Now this is one of the paid plugins I'm using, which is Vectomelt, but it's just a really good multi-effect plugin. Let's disable these. We're basically using all these plugins to add movement, life, and character to this electric piano, otherwise it sounds kind of bland. Definitely cutting a lot of the lows to help it fit in the track better. Ping pong delay. More of a modulated effect here, melting sunset. Flux Mini, doing a bit of volume shape ducking. And a compressor, Tone Boosters Compressor V3, with the Vintage Punch preset, fast attack, medium release, 3:1 ratio. So most of the processing there is actually mixing and helping it fit in the track, but we also have Vectomelt doing heavy lifting when it comes to processing the sound and making it sound much more unique. We also have a second layer of Electric V. There's honestly not too much else here other than the same plugins, Sonic EQ, Channel EQ, Vectomelt, another ping pong delay. So these have very similar effects between these two layers. Let's bring in the bass. Which is also a Sforzando library called Meat Bass. Let's remove all of these plugins to hear what this bass sounded like before I processed it. Pretty standard bowed upright bass. Now this plugin here, the sub bass, is doing pretty heavy lifting to turn this into a real bass patch. And I'm going to bring up the level. Some dynamic EQ. Cutting some of the low mids. Okay, so we're really bringing out the bass using this huge low shelf boost. Stereo control to, I'm guessing, bring it more mono. Yep, we're monoing everything below 153 Hz. And last but not least, we have Tone Boosters Ferrix, which I think is like a tape emulation, but without the tape wow and flutter. It's more of just like a tape saturation effect. Next we have the drums. This is the free version of Steven Slate Drums 5. This is an older version, I believe, and I did quite a bit of processing and mixing for this drum kit. Let's go over some of that now. So what's on the drum bus? This will be the first thing to check out. Tone Boosters bus compressor. Add some nice pop, some nice attack to that sound. Sonimus Sonic EQ. Let's check out the snare. Pretty substantial EQ here. Klanghelm DC 1A3 and Tone Boosters compressor. Let's just disable all three of these, see what it sounds like. DC1A3 is definitely doing most of the work here. We're getting a nice flattened snare sound, which fits with this mix pretty well, where I didn't need a super aggressive punchy snare. I needed it subdued quite a bit. Moving on, we have our toms. Ton of compression there. The Opto Toms preset, perfect for this application. Slow attack, medium release, and a 5:1 ratio. Bit of EQ there, noise gate, and transperk for transient shaping. Quite a bit of EQing here, though. Let's see what we cut out from this EQ. Yeah, that boxy tone there. For the hi-hats, just some EQ. For ride, we just have a compressor. Don't even think it's actually doing anything, to be honest. Just a ton of makeup gain to make it loud enough. I usually do quite a bit of processing on overheads. I didn't do too much here. Tiny bit of EQ. Yeah, cut the lows and high shelf as well. And then we have our compressor, which is doing a bit of work here. Rock overheads preset. For our rooms, we have EQ, and let's see what we have going on in room 2. Yeah, I like to do this. I like to slam the rooms. So we're using MJUC Jr. from Klanghelm. Really crushing that secondary room sound. Really like that. Moving on, we have Cheese Machine, which is like a string emulation synth. This is a cool little free thing from Together Audio. I think they also have a decent B3 organ. High shelf EQ, bit of a low shelf cut there as well. It's almost like a tilt EQ to help it fit in the mix better. Then we have Tape Cassette 2 from Calum Audio. I absolutely love this plugin. It doesn't need to be on 16 times oversampling though. Just using it for a tiny bit of wow and flutter here. Normally I use this a little more aggressively. And then last we have Easy Reverb, which I haven't used this in years. Yeah, well, it's doing its job pretty well. Creating a nice space. 20 millisecond pre-delay, 3-second tail, wide stereo, 50% wet mix. Creating a very nice spacious chamber sound, like that. And next we have one of my favorite free plugins of all time. This is Yuhi Podolsky. Kind of a futuristic electric pad here. And quite a bit of processing here. We have Flex Mini, Drift Maker, and Sonymous SoniQ. I am a crushing battery on this laptop right now. Other than the EQ and volume shaping, Drift Maker does some pretty interesting stuff. Delay disintegration device. And then I have an Alchemy Rain Patch, which is Logic's stock built-in synth, very high quality. And we have this nice ambient background rain patch. And then a couple tracks I didn't use here. You can see here we are really testing the capabilities of this Core 2 Duo processor. That is pushing it to its absolute limit. Let's check out our final bus processing. Tone Boosters bus compressor for a bit of glue. Super slow attack, pretty fast release. We have Tone Boosters Real Bus, which is a tape emulation plugin. I feel like this lifts up the mid frequencies of the track a bit. It might roll off a tiny bit of high frequency, but I don't feel it's problematic here. But it does add just like a tiny bit of movement and life to the mix. It's a bit cleaner with it off, but it's a bit more cohesive with it enabled. Very minimal wow and flutter, over bias, no circuit clip, bit of saturation. Then we have Tone Booster's Barricade V3, fantastic limiter, definitely the best free limiter on the market, even to this day. Only doing a tiny bit of gain reduction here. And then a little bit of EQ, just to match my reference. Emphasize the kick a bit, bring out the shine on the high frequencies, and then a final Tone Booster's limiter to bring up the output level, only 1.5 decibels of gain reduction. The next track we have here is quite a bit different. It's a lo-fi hip-hop track called Lofiit, and you can already hear some hiss in the background. That's because I went for heavy tape emulation, tape processing sound. Let's listen back to the track and then dive into the production. Overall, a simpler track, definitely not pushing the system to its absolute limits with this one, which is nice. I didn't have to freeze every channel here. I'll go through this track a little bit quicker. We have the same Electric V from Production Voices. And we're using delay, which is, I would say, top 3 free delays on the market. Super quick delay time of 1/16 triplet. It's also in ping pong mode, but you can hear it's almost pushing the Rhodes back a tiny bit, spreading it out left and right. Not really as much a delay, more of like a spatial reverb / delay effect. Next we have tape cassette, which I showed off before. Getting a bit of saturation and some wow and flutter. Yeah, you can hear that quick wow and flutter. creating that lo-fi effect. Ton of EQ here. Refresh Roads is a pretty fitting preset name. And then one thing to note here is I'm sidechaining the Rhodes with the kick. Very common technique for lo-fi hip-hop and hip-hop in general. We're just pushing the Rhodes out of the way to let the kick cut through a bit more. Next we have our strings, which is the same string library I showed off before. I was pretty limited with how many things I was able to install on this MacBook. Initially, I did all of this work on the internal hard drive, which was a lot more painful to transfer files and install libraries and work. It's a little easier with the SSD now. Okay, we have some pretty intense reverb going on here. It's actually not doing too much, but I can tell Valhalla Supermassive is. Pretty heavy EQ, cut all the lows, bring out some of the mid frequencies and a tiny bit of the high. For piano top, we have a different Sforzando library, but also by Production Voices. This is the Estate Grand Piano LE. It's overall a pretty heavy plugin. I'm surprised it worked on this MacBook, given the specs. We have Chow Tape Model, amazing free tape plugin, and this is one of my presets, I think. Dirtier Cassette. Making the character fit a lot better with this track, especially for lo-fi hip-hop. Tiny bit of this Skynet free reverb. Some more Son EQ, very big high-frequency boost, as well as some mid-frequency. And then another EQ at the end. Here is a secondary pad that I bring in at the end of the track, called Dreams Illuminated. I'm guessing this is an Alchemy patch, it is. And I'm not surprised I had to freeze that. This is probably pretty heavy on this CPU. Awesome Tone Boosters plugin here. This is also free. Called Time Machine. Flux Mini, volume shaping. So instead of sidechaining this sound with the kick, I am using an internal volume ducking sidechaining. And then some EQ at the end. Kalimba Morph, another Alchemy preset here. Tone Boosters Time Machine, Drift Maker, Volume Shaping, Channel EQ. I think it's actually the same as I did for Dreams Illuminated. Alright, we have something different going on here for the bass. Surge Synth. MJUC Jr. Really controlling and smoothing out the bass sound here. And then huge mid cut here. Then a huge high shelf boost here, as well as Pultec effect here with a low boost, low cut, and nothing to the mids. Now let's move on to our drums. All the drums here came from this Schulz Lo-Fi kit. Probably using one of my Chow Tape presets. Yep, punchy lo-fi drums. Wow, really changing the sound of that. Just some transient shaping and EQ. Mainly just bringing down the sustain. And hi-hat. Compressor, EQ, tape cassette, Flux Mini, standard stuff. I think on the compressor I'm also sidechaining it with the kick. Yes, I am. So here's all the drums together. We also have a couple of bus reverbs here. Super ambient reverb here. And then more of like a deep room reverb here. Let's move on to our mix bus processing. Compressor. A little bit of glue, 2:1 ratio. Pretty standard mix bus EQing there. Bringing up the highs a bit, bringing up the lows a bit, and then 2 instances of tone boosters barricade for limiting. And just a cool little meter at the end. This third project is called the Atmos. Don't be deceived by how few channels you see here. I think this is probably the most in-depth production and definitely the most taxing on the processor, probably because I'm using a bunch of Alchemy presets and a couple other things here, and I did quite a bit of mixing. If we look at the mixer here, yeah, there's a lot of plugins going on. Not by modern computer standards, but for this computer, this is quite a bit. I remember I went back and I fixed one of the little errors I had in here. Something is off. Okay, let's get into this one. We have Prism Audio Atmos Piano, which is the core of the track. Very simple plugin here. Some compression. One of my Choute presets. Almost lo-fi piano. Awesome for this application. Tone boosters equalizer. Yeah, doing quite a bit there. Tiny bit of volume shaping. Next is analog silk pad, and we have, I think, Acon Digital Chorus. I'm not going to unfreeze this because it'll destroy this computer, and a channel EQ. Another analog smooth pad here. With some different processing. Crazy EQ curve there. And Tone Boosters Time Machine. Next we have our drum bus. For the actual drum bus, I have Tone Boosters Compressor, smoothing out some of the peaks. Okay, we have two different drum kits. It's pretty interesting. Fun little drum groove here as well. And one of my chote presets. Nice tape saturation. Alright, some different stuff for these drums. The kick, we have vPre72 by Fuse Audio Labs, amazing developer. Flattening out the kick, EQ and overdrive to add some extra clipping, saturation, wave shaping, whatever you want to call it. For the hi-hat, we have tape cassette and transperk. It's rolling off some of those really aggressive high frequencies and removing the sustain. Next we have the snare. Pretty standard EQ, low cut, bit of a resonant cut. I see why I removed that. Tri-Tick Crush. Whoa, that's doing a lot. Downsampling it is removing those really aggressive high frequencies and a bit of drive. Wow. Oh, as well as an 8,000 hertz high cut with a graphic EQ stone. Added some life, some punch to it. Ooh, that's cool. See why it's mixed so low though. And IVGI2. Secondary hi-hat. Transperk, transient shaping, and tape delay. Next is dark heavy bass. It's dark and heavy. Almost like a smiley face EQ curve here. Really freeing up a lot of real estate here in the mid frequencies of the track for other stuff to poke through. Tube EQ, low boost, low attenuation, really aggressive high boost. Oh, do we have sidechaining with a compressor? We do, so our drums are ducking our bass. Next we have the legendary Camel Crusher. I'm so sad that this doesn't work on 64-bit systems. We're using the Annihilate preset. It's doing its job. Love this thing. One of my chote presets, I'm guessing. Yep. And just a gain plugin. Making a mono bass. Yeah. Could be cool in the track with a stereo bass, but I felt it was interfering with the low frequencies in the piano. Just make it mono. Okay, next we have a Strange Echo Keys. This is one of the full bucket music synths. Awesome atmospheric sound. Whoa! Tal reverb. No, Tone Booster's reverb. Kind of a small room sound. Channel EQ and then exciter. Adding high frequency harmonics. Next is Devil Tack. We're using the iconic DX7 emulation Dext, as well as full bucket brigade delay. As well as another delay at the end here. Some tau reverb. 4. And probably one of my chow tape presets. Maybe. Softening the sound a bit. Then we have this other Dext patch. More of a standard synth pluck sound with some reverb. Delay. And finally, let's go through our mix bus processing. Some glue compression with quite a bit of makeup. Slow attack, fast release, low ratio. Soft knee. Smiley face EQ curve, bring out the lows, bring out the highs. A little bit of a low cut here. It's mix bus equalization. I'm not going to be too aggressive. I shouldn't have to be. Then we have TDR Slick EQ. Bringing out the mids, bringing out the highs. Tiny bit of low frequency, not much. And then some tone boosters barricade.